So without that, Scott, shall we get started? Or do you want to say a few words first?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Harris, for putting this together. Thank you for coming. Pretty impressed by the turnout. Exceeded my expectations initially. I'm Scott Sundvall. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English. I also am the director of the Center for Writing Communication, which is right downstairs. After this retreat, if you want assistance with your dissertation, you can always come visit us. If you want more information about the CWC, how to make an appointment, with whom you can work, so on and so forth, you can visit us right over there at the table at any time during the week. Or you can come downstairs. Some of us will be in the office right below us. But aside from that, yeah, I guess we can start talking about dissertations.
Yeah. So I'm just going to have a seat here because I've been standing up way too much this past week.
So I wanted to start by kind of talking about what a dissertation is, because I think it's a lot of things that aren't otherwise obvious. And I think ways in which we can conceptualize a dissertation and imagine how it's beneficial to us can make the process of writing a dissertation easier and more productive. So the first thing I want to note is that a dissertation really actually isn't a book. So how many of you have been told that a dissertation is a book? Some of us? Okay. It can be a book, but I think the idea that it is a book is very misleading and just not true. Oftentimes people will radically revise a dissertation after they've completed it and revise it into a book. But rarely, if ever, is a dissertation on its own a book. In fact, if you go to a lot of press sites where they have submission instructions, it will explicitly state that they do not accept unrevised dissertations. And the reason why they have to state this is because there is this idea that a dissertation is a book when it's not, right? So you have to remind people that it's not. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't revise it into a book, but you don't need to overwhelm yourself with the idea that it needs to be a publishable book. Because what it really is a book-length final exam. Right? It's a demonstration of knowledge in a specific field of study. That's really all it is, and that's you don't need to think of it as anything more than that. It's also a process of professionalization, I think, at least such was my experience. So, like Dr. Harris, I finished my dissertation not too long ago. 4 years ago.
Almost 7 years for me now.
Yeah. But what I mean by professionalization is I think that one of the things that the dissertation process does is it teaches you how to develop into an independent scholar, right? So while you have a committee and you have a chair, they're there to help facilitate your research and sort of guide you. I do think that a big part of the process is sort of engendering a way of doing research that is more independent, right? It's also, of course, the way in which you actually get a PhD, lest we forget. And it's also the way, especially if you want to continue on to an academia, it's how you get a job, right? And so a lot of these things are obvious, right? But I think they're important things to remember because I think a dissertation can become overwhelming at certain points, and it's important to remember these sort of basic things that I think help us bring the dissertation back down to its sort of simple foundation, right? And remind us some of the benefits that a dissertation provides outside of just being a tedious exercise, right? In brutality. So okay, that's what I have for that.
Well, and I want to add a few things onto this, especially that point that the dissertation is not a book. It can be radically revised, yes, but don't think of it as something that has to be like the books you are looking through. I'll talk a lot more about this on Thursday morning when I talk about scholarly communication and what you can do with the dissertation and which can also help with this, because when you think about it as a final exam, not as a book, and especially like this professionalization and how you go about doing this, how you act as an independent scholar, you need to be thinking also about publishing. And so I'll go into a lot more detail about that when I talk about scholarly communication and what you can do with this. But yeah, I think Scott really talked all that, so let's go on. So how to approach the dissertation? How do you approach writing it?
Yeah, I find that this is often the question I often receive from people in terms of general questions as to how to go about writing a dissertation. I'm one of the people who thinks that there is no one right way to do something, especially when it comes to writing, and that's even more so when it comes to writing a dissertation. So what works for you, but sometimes people don't know what works for them. So one of the things I want to emphasize is the writing process. So in writing studies, which is a field in which I'm a part, so the writing process is more than just writing, and it's important to remember this, right? So there are a lot of things that you do that are part of your writing process that aren't part of you actually writing. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Right? Okay. And it's important to remember that because how it is you structure your time before, after, and around your actual writing is actually part of your writing process, because your actual writing is informed by what it is you do before, after, and around your actual writing, right? So for example, people often talk about writer's block, right? And I think that this is a myth because what they fail to remember is this idea that you're blocked. It assumes that writing only takes place when you're actually writing, right? And it can be the process in general, the things that you do before or after or around writing, that is causing certain hang-ups, right, when it comes to actually sitting down and writing. So scheduling, again, I don't think that there's one right way. You know, I've read so many sort of clickbait things on how to write a dissertation. I'm sure many of you have as well, right? Strategies in terms of scheduling. Some people really recommend having a fixed schedule, right? You know, where between these hours you actually write, these hours you do research. I've seen other suggestions that advocate for a lucid where you only write when you feel like it, right? Which works for some people, right? I don't think there's one right way to do things. I do think it's important though to be cognizant of the fact that certain things do work for certain people, and to sort of find what works best for you, and you know, capitalize upon that. These two last things I think are important. So a chair's function, so a dissertation chair, again, I think is there to help guide you and facilitate you. And certainly some chairs I've found are more hands-on and some are more hands-off, right? But what I would strongly suggest that you do is develop, how many of you are in like a peer writing group? Only a couple of us?
And the English majors.
We're together.
Yes.
In a writing group.
I strongly recommend you do
I
this.
have tried on a couple of occasions to organize one.
Yes.
Maybe once or twice, and they're like, well, can't come anymore, can't make the time. So, if you have any suggestions for that, I'd be more than welcome.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, because part of the idea is you hold each other accountable, right? And I think one of the great things about peer writing groups is that's the kind of mentoring that you're going to receive once you're done with the PhD, because you're not going to have a dissertation chair or committee, right? Once you're done with your PhD, right? You know, so if you go on into academia, peer writing, I mean, that's what me and my colleagues do in terms of getting assistance with writing, and so I think that's a great way to continue receiving mentoring from your peers while continuing to develop as an independent scholar. It's also a great way to keep each other accountable, right? I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, I was going to say, like, so you kind of touched on a little bit of that when you talk about, you know, writer's block's not really a thing. So what are some of the other surrounding activities that if you do get stuck and you feel like you can't produce, what are some of the other things that you could be doing to still feel like you're making progress? Or what are some of those things?
Free writing is one. Reference
It's
list.
nice and concrete.
Yeah.
Reference list, free writing, taking a moment to do the type of reading that you haven't had a chance to do, right? You know, I think it's fascinating when one, you know, realizes these other things that interest you that don't seem related to your dissertation are nonetheless somewhat related to your dissertation, otherwise you wouldn't be interested in them, and they can help sort of percolate ideas, right? Letting yourself do these things that seem not related to your dissertation can nonetheless be productive. Those are a few things in the mind that should be present.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, you know, like sometimes if I get really, really stuck, it's that, you know, I was telling some other people, I'm a musicologist, one of the things that you find in a lot of composers when they talk about composing music is that the most useful thing they can do is take a walk, you know, and that allows the ideas to kind of sit, percolate, and it's okay to take these like kind of momentary breaks. I know that it's not exactly the most picturesque day in Memphis, but you know, at least it's not raining like this weekend. And like I said, working on your citations, working on that. One of the things that I did while I had my dissertation is that I had, kind of like you were talking about, I had an entire side project that was very tangentially related that I kind of worked on just as a break when I didn't want to do my one thing. I kind of this other side project that has opened up a different field of research for me. And it's okay to allow you to have these things. You don't have to be writing 24/7. And like I was telling Scott yesterday, my single most productive day of writing for my dissertation, I wrote 20 pages in a single day. Not a single one of them ended up in my dissertation. So just because you have page count doesn't necessarily mean it is actually useful. Though those 20 pages, it helped me work through some ideas. So there is, as long as you are actually trying to work and trying to be productive and doing something that, and tangentially related, moving forward, you can still be making progress.
I would say such is not only okay, but maybe even necessary to a certain degree. Right?
You skipped over the when to leave new research alone, and I'm actually curious about that.
Yeah, so
There's
It's all
every
related.
single day.
It's all
At
coming
what
out.
point do I say
It's
enough?
so interesting.
Yes.
Oh my God, I'm gonna end this. Holy shit.
that's why, yeah.
Forever, yes.
I mean, that's the thing, right? You can, and this sort of goes back to the idea of a dissertation as a final exam, not as a book, because at some point you have to finish it, right? And you're never going to get through all the research that you can do, right? Every time you read one book, you're probably going to discover 5 more that you want to read or think you should read, right? And at some point, though, you have to really move away from continuously reading and actually, get to the process of actually writing. My experience was when I was in grad school, a lot of the people that didn't finish or took too long to finish were people that just couldn't put the research down. Now that being said, I do think that when you find yourself at a spot where you can't, I don't know, the writing just isn't happening, that's a great time to go ahead and pick up a book, because why not, right? There's no reason not to. But don't get caught in this
The rabbit hole.
Yeah.
yeah, it's exactly what it is, yeah, because it doesn't end.
There is a magic phrase to remember when you're doing your defense, and it should not be a crutch, but it is something to keep in mind, and that is, it is completely legitimate to say, this is outside the scope of my study. That is a perfectly legitimate phrase to use, because you can't know everything. If it seems like directly related, maybe a little bit related, yes, you should explore it, but keep your ideas, keep your research focused on what is this dissertation actually about. And like Scott was alluding to say, there's probably a phrase that people have said to you. There's only one kind of dissertation, a done dissertation. Everything else doesn't count for anything. ABD is just 3 letters. It doesn't mean a thing.
And trust me, your committee hasn't read everything either, right? So there's no reason to assume that they have, or
If there's like, I don't know what the size of the committees are at University of Memphis, mine was 5. If 3 out of 5 of them actually read every single word in my dissertation, I think that's maybe accurate.
It's also very true.
So, all right, any questions about this slide or anything we've talked about so far? Please do ask questions. Oh, yeah.
I'll bet you there.
So outlining, so you're asking about outlining for the dissertation? Oh, that's the steps to do it.
Yeah.
So like if you're talking about like the steps like, submitting things and submitting them to the committee and everything else, so that is basically what Jennifer is going to be talking about tomorrow, like when you need to submit things to the graduate school, when you need to have things turned in, when you have to have defended by. Those kind of deadlines and stuff are Jennifer will be talking about that tomorrow, and I don't know those off the top of my head. Now, if you're talking about like the actual outline of the document itself, that I've discovered it can vary by project to project. Some people talk about the 5-chapter dissertation kind of thing, or I think some engineering ones, it's 3 chapters, and they have a very rigid format, but that really does vary by discipline. So that's something that I would say your chair needs to be involved with, but like, in my experience, I had my dissertation in a very nice, like 5-6 concise chapter layout, and then one of my mentors was like, this structure is not working, we need to radically rethink it. And that was probably my worst day, because I was like 4 chapters into the whole thing, and after a very bad night, came back the next morning, pulled the whole thing apart, and put it back together. It took maybe 3-4 hours to reorganize the whole thing, then smoothing out, but it worked. But, and again, it has to do with the project itself, how it should be structured. That's a conversation between you, your chair, and your writing groups if you have one. You want to add anything to that, Scott?
That's what I would say, yeah. There's a certain way that we go about things in the Department of English, but I would assume that it can, it would likely be different in other disciplines. I don't know that it is or would be, it would be, yeah.
So there's no specific format that is required by the University of Memphis? I thought there was one online that we had to
Yes.
follow.
There's a format for the document, it has to be the format for the title page, format for the table of contents, specific fonts and sizes and spacing, right, Jennifer?
Right, but when it comes to the actual document, it's basically whatever your committee approves.
I see.
Yeah, it's like that balance, like there's the legal, yeah.
Could you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that a little bit louder, Jennifer?
As far as formatting, there is a specific format for the preliminary pages. So your title page, your table of contents, acknowledgement, dedication, if you have those, and your abstract. Right, and it is located on the graduate school website. There is a checklist that you will print off and turn in where you can check off that you've done all those things. But as far as the actual document, like your chapter 1, your actual dissertation, is whatever your committee has approved.
Yeah, so that's a lot of what Jennifer will be talking about tomorrow, is those formatting guidelines, the deadlines, the paperwork, and everything else. Yeah. Any other questions about that? Yes, Meredith.
I just had more of a comment, actually, or a recommendation. I was going to speak to what Lorraine said earlier about writing groups, and how hard it can be to actually get people together and stay together. What I discovered, because I've only been a part of 3 different ones since I've been back to school, and what finally worked was when I was working with someone who was in my same concentration. So even though Lorraine and I are in the same department, we're in totally different concentrations, and we were at totally different parts of the writing process. She was actually already working, I think, on her perspectives or dissertation. I was still like finishing up comps. And so the fact that we were in 2 very different places, even though we were done with coursework, it was still really hard for us to kind of bounce ideas off of one another. So once Justin and I started meeting, we had another thinking group with us. We were all at the same stage of the writing process, and that seemed to help out a lot.
And I think another thing is just, I don't know, I think because you have a writing group, there's this sense that you have to have like 20 pages to exchange with the group you're working with, or you always have to have this polished thing that you're sharing. And I think it's sort of an ego thing that you want to
You don't want to be a slacker.
You want to present a certain version of yourself to your colleagues, or whatever, but just like letting yourself off the hook and just like, all right, I want to have 2 pages that I want to share with, like, for this like session, whatever we're looking at, and just like making it more of like, I don't know, just taking the pressure off like what it has to be.
And taking the pressure off of quantity versus quality. It's better to have like 5 really good pages than 20 pages of utter drivel. That is another thing. So remember that, and some people get really fixated on like, oh, I have to have like 5 chapters, 20 pages each, yada, yada, yada. Or whatever, that's only 100 pages. Okay, so yeah, no.
100 pages each.
The worst, again, this is a complete tangent, but again, it's the worst comment I ever had was someone who didn't know me, didn't know my research. Was like, how long was your dissertation? Like, oh, 196 pages. And she looked me in the eye and said, I don't think I trust a dissertation that's less than 200 pages. And I'm like, what?
4 pages short.
Yeah,
You should go back and write
She didn't
4
read it. She didn't know it. So anyway, so next one. So we already touched on peer writing groups.
Yeah, well, a lot of this is redundant. We've already talked about a number of these things. One thing I looked at family and friends, I will note that I think it's important to use them as a support system, but I also think it's very important to make it clear, particularly to family, when you need space to write and to work. And that isn't always easy to negotiate, I know, but I think for your own health, not just for, in terms of productivity, but for your own health and well-being, I really want to emphasize that. We already talked about a lot of the other things, but is there something you want
What
to add,
is the
Michael?
submissions?
So
I can speak to that. I don't know what you were attending, but my PhD was in English, but one thing that my major professor suggested was to present each of my chapters at a conference, like submit your paper to a conference and go and present it. And one, that kept me on schedule, because then, I have to have a chapter by, or something resembling a chapter, by April or March or whenever the conference was, as well as you get feedback from other scholars in the field. I got a lot of sources that way. I met a lot of scholars in the field that way, one of which I quoted right in front of her. Luckily, I got it right. I didn't know she was in the room. But yeah, you meet a lot of people that way. You get a lot of sources that way, and you actually, get to present your research in front of actual scholars. And like I said, it does keep you on track so that you do finish something that year.
Yeah. And to what Jennifer was saying, what Scott was saying, yes, part of the dissertation process is learning how to be an independent scholar, how to be an independent researcher, how to kind of research, justify, and follow your own ideas to their logical conclusions. But as this slide kind of shows, no dissertation is done alone. One of the things that I remember reading when I was starting my process is that, think about your dissertation as the quest to destroy the one ring. We all need a fellowship. Some may fall by the wayside, but if you have that one or two people that you can rely on, not only to bounce ideas off of, but also to kind of be that person who can help pull you out when they can see you need a break, or just it's like, hey, come on, let's go grab a beer, or whatever your drink of choice is, whatever. Having that support system, be it family, friends, co-workers, whatever. We all have different lives, we all have different time commitments, but don't get so in your own world with the dissertation that it becomes your entire world, okay? This retreat is meant to focus it, but part of the reason why I wanted to build in this time for things like this is to meet other people who are at this stage. Maybe you can find someone that can be a part of a peer writing group. Maybe you can find someone who is, in a different discipline, but maybe their research is fascinating. You can talk about it, share ideas. So think about this time as also that opportunity to network and meet with other people. Yeah.
I guess the other thing I would add is we talked a little bit about how a dissertation can become a book, but in and of itself is not a book, at least not as a dissertation. And conferencing is a great idea, but your dissertation can also become numerous articles. Right? And one of the benefits of submitting articles to journals is much like going to conferences, you get, so even if you don't get accepted, you get oftentimes extensive feedback from what should be some of the top scholars in your field. Right?
Except reviewer number 2, that guy's a jerk.
Yeah, I will note that, it's good you brought that up because you will get very negative feedback from time to time. Yeah, I mean, you just will. It's to be prepared for that. You're not alone. Everybody gets, the worst, so one time I got from reviewer number 2, I think they do number 2 because they give you the nicest one first, and then, I think that's the idea, right? Yeah. And it said, I don't think this is very well written or should be published anywhere, but insofar as the author might benefit from my feedback, I give the following, like brief response followed by like 10, 15 single-space pages where went line by line, yeah. But that happens, and it ended up getting accepted, right? So you just kind of have to, roll with it. It'll happen. So.
And we'll talk more about that whole process again on Thursday when I talk about scholarly communications. So we'll talk a lot about some of this later on, but you want to bring up what happens once you actually get done.
Yeah, once you get done, unfortunately, you're far from over, right? So revision into a book is one option. I found, though, that a lot of people, including myself, like to take some time away from the dissertation once you have completed it. So, you don't feel any obligation to immediately jump into revising your dissertation into a book. There might be a lot of other research that you haven't been able to tend to because you've been working your dissertation. It's often healthy to go ahead and work on that. Obviously, the job market often comes up immediately after the dissertation. And if you have specific questions about that, we can have a conversation about that.
And we'll have this person from Career Services here tomorrow to talk about like after the dis specifically.
Dividing your dissertation into article submissions I just talked about, new research, also nothing. Take some time to yourself. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It's important to, self-care is important, right? Even in academia, despite what people may tell you. So it's okay to relax and not worry.
Take that trip.
Yeah.
Go hike a mountain.
Yes.
I don't know about the rest
If
of y'all,
you
but I
find
have a
that
scout
right.
that's a whole lot more, he's been getting lately.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to devote some time to
Talking, having partners, either a long-term partner or married or whatever, that can be a great support system. But I myself, single, I just had friends while going through it. But hearing stories from friends who, their partners were like, hey, can you do something? It's like it's sometimes really hard to make and have other people understand what you're going through, but keep at it and take care of yourself. And yeah, it's hard. So, yeah, I do, and we have a few minutes here. Any questions about anything? Yeah.
You said that those 20 pages were thrown out.
Yes.
I'm a very sensitive person and a perfectionist, and when anything of mine is thrown out, I don't know how to take that. How did you handle that?
Well, for me, it was a logical choice. It just didn't go with the structure of it. But I will say that the more painful one is that I had 10 pages diving into the different philosophies of 2 directors I was talking about in my dissertation. And I thought they were some of my best 10 pages. But in the end, between both my writing group, my mentor, and myself, it's like, this doesn't really add anything. This was one of those kind of side tangents that just didn't really add to the overall dissertation. I condensed some of it, that was there, but yeah. In the editorial process, from anything nonfiction, fiction, anyone will tell you, don't fall in love with anything you write, because odds are the things that you love the most are the ones you have to end up cutting. It's like a Sophie's choice.
I had one sentence cut so far, but they said it was pedantic, and I was like, oh, that hurts.
It is, and this is all, you're going to have to develop a very thick skin in this thing, because you're going to get rejection from journals, from publishers, from jobs. It's going to suck, and I say this as one of the worst losers and one of the most overly sensitive people I know. I will admit to this, but take a moment, take a beat. It's like never email back angry. Take a moment, wallow in it, give yourself some time, and come back, and eventually it's either you will discover that they are right, or you will figure out, no, this is right, and you'll figure out the best way to state your case. But figuring out which one is the right direction and being able to kind of be self-reflective enough to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah, I would add that reviewer two, I think there's a cruelty in academia that reproduces itself. You know, I think that reviewer two, you know, at one point also had a reviewer two, right? That, you know, sort of, you know, so one thing that I often, you know, far down the road, be the reviewer two in the world that you want to see. You know, don't reproduce that cycle of cruelty. The other thing too is that, you know, I think you brought up a great point that, so while you threw it away, you know, in terms of the dissertation, that
It's still saved somewhere.
it could become its own article, right? Yeah,
It
exactly.
is,
Yeah,
it's not a dissertation,
Yes,
that's
throw
not
it away.
yeah, it could be a separate article.
Which
Yeah,
reminds
save
me,
it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, if you wanna know how brilliant you are, at some point, you can go back and read it and be like, wow, it really said something. Or you can drag it into another paper.
Yeah.
I save all of them.
speaking of saving it though, that reminds me of one thing I wanted to bring up here really quickly. Let's talk about backing up your data. If you do not already have a backup of your complete dissertation and your research files and everything else saved somewhere, before you start today, toddle down to the bookstore, grab a USB jump drive, buy one, save an immediate backup, and at the end of every day, wipe that backup out and re-upload it to that hard drive. Because, while thankfully I never had that, I hear enough stories that you should always be backing up. And if you want to talk a little bit more about foldering and how to save that data, how to structure that data, come and talk to me. I'm more than happy to talk about it. Yeah, question?
I have more on that.
Okay.
My external hard drive completely broke down on me, so my backup broke, and my computer
Oh,
broke down.
Print off a copy.
So I
Put
also,
it in your freezer.
well, I have a lot of
In case it happens.
GIS data,
oh.
so I also recommend storing it on a cloud.
Yeah, having like either
I email it to
a
myself every
Dropbox.
day.
I do have my external hard drive, but I'm gonna bring it into somewhere to see if they can extract the data from it, but.
There are two principles I want to bring up. So besides being a musicologist, I'm also a trained archivist. And we have a principle in archives called LOCKSS, L-O-C-K-S-S. Lots of copies keeps shit safe.
Love it.
Yeah.
But let me give one little word of advice here. If you're doing a backup thing, don't accidentally take the one on the backup and put it on your computer.
Yes, keep track of
Because
which
I
one
did
is
that,
which.
and you can't get that back.
I always work for my primary copy and then save to my backup copies, and then knowing which is which. And again, the other principle, which is from computer science, is that 1 is none, 2 is 1, and 3 is 2. Yes?
We have a colleague in our department whose computer broke, her external hard drive broke, and then she couldn't access her cloud data. And she lost all of her data from like the first part of her research and the grant that she was working on with one of our professors. So I would say back up your backup, your backup.
Yeah,
I do. So here's what I email it to myself. I put it on a Google Drive. I put it in Dropbox, and I have it on a hard drive.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also an anxious person, as that clearly indicates. But I mean, you know, there's a benefit to that. One of those is going to pan out. You know.
Yeah. And it saves to completely wipe out one backup and replace it with your primary one at least once a week. You've had your hand up a couple times, so.
Yeah, I'm one of the first, to go through the doctoral program at University College. And I'm interested, took a course last semester, it was really helping me format, the title. I'm going back and forth. But I'm interested in how I would get into a peer writing group.
So I don't
My
think.
classes are online.
So I would say that's really hard because a lot of times peer writing groups are organized by discipline, by college, and they kind of self-select. But if you're an online, I would talk to your students in online classes and see if this email all them, see if anyone would be interested. You can set up virtual meetings, Google Hangouts, Skype, whatever, and see if anyone would be interested in that. Even as much as just I send you a copy, you shoot me back some feedback in an email. Most of my peer writing comes that format. We do have a peer writing group here in the library, but my most trusted readers One currently lives out in Colorado, one is currently in West Virginia, I have another one in Japan I always send abstracts to, because she is a master of abstracts. So I like, if I'm submitting something, I'll email her, she's currently in Japan, you know, and she'll get back to me. And these are all people I know from conferences or my own PhD.
Now, how do you select your conferences?
This is something I'll talk about a little bit more in my talk on scholarly communication, but it's mainly two formats. Listservs for your academic disciplines. So like for me, you know, American Library Association, Music Library Association, American Musicological Society, these kinds of things, get on their listservs, they'll send out call for papers, call for proposals. The other is just your peers, you know, if someone, you hear about the conferences they go to and make a note of it, it's word of mouth is a big thing. But listservs for your discipline and other various things are the best way to hear about those things. So, yeah. So check your spam folders, because sometimes those mailing lists hit spam folders.
I've actually started to find some Facebook groups in my discipline that are related to different literary societies and or like conferences. And so you'll find CFP sometimes on social media too.
Yeah, those of us in the humanities, HNet and UPenn, both have sites that for CFPs, both edited collections, conferences.
Yeah. Yes, question back there.
Can you offer some suggestions on generating ideas? So ours is like a 3-project format, and I have like the first 2, and the writing is fine. But then the third one, I can't come up with any ideas. So like, do you have any suggestions on like idea generation?
Oh, okay. So what you're describing sounds, are you in the computer science program?
No, epidemiology.
Okay. Yeah, some of the sciences have this like format where you have like 3 independent articles that is basically your dissertation. So idea generation, that's a tricky one. Rob, any suggestions? Or Robin, do you have a...
I actually do. Hi, Robin Poston, Dean of the Graduate School. By the way, awesome. You guys are giving like the best advice I wish I had heard when I was in meeting. So, thank you. We thank Scott and Mike. But idea generation, I had that very problem. It was the thing that everybody gets stuck at some point in their dissertation phase, and that was mine. And it took me 2 years to get out of it, so I get it. What finally broke me through it was I went back and read some of the seminal articles, you know, the future research section, and they actually put ideas in there, and so I built on that. So I don't know, I just started making lists that I read from that, and it then sparked what I wanted to do. I then came up with my own 6 ideas, and then sorted them by what I liked the most, and then talked to my advisor. That's kind of how I broke through that, but that could be a sticking point. Some people just seem to know what they want to do. How many people here came in with an idea already? Yeah, see, these guys are, it's great. It's awesome, it's really awesome. And thanks for being here today, y'all. This is really terrific.
Yeah, that's a great idea, thank you. I'm glad you're here. So I know we scheduled like 9:15. Is there like one more question anyone has before we kind of break for the morning? Okay. So, Robin, I invited you here specifically if you wanted to say a few other words.
Actually, I made a list, and then y'all have covered them all. So the only thing I'm going to say is a dissertation is like climbing a mountain, and there's a cloud at the top. You don't know how high that mountain is. You just have to keep climbing. Doesn't it feel like that? You don't know when you're done because your visors and your, yeah, thank you, right? So keep climbing. Just keep climbing, because the good news is when you do make it to the top, it's a nice slide down the other side, okay? You're going to make it. Just being here today shows me you have the fortitude and the discipline. You're going to be writing today, write every day. Y'all can do this. I know you can, okay? So good luck. If we can help in the graduate school, me or Jennifer or any of these guys, we're here to help you, okay?
And the one last person I would like to introduce, besides Robin, who's Dean of the Graduate School, also back there is the Executive Director, Dean of Libraries, John Evans, Dr. John Evans.
Dean Poston and I first heard about this, we thought it was an absolutely stellar idea. Then there was that secondary thought of, where was this 30 years ago? But I'm over that now. I won't mention it again, at least for an hour. But anyway, there's something that, in all of this, and don't be daunted. I love the metaphor of the cloud at the mountaintop and all that sort of thing. It's not a volcano, right? Okay. No, forget that. Don't think another word about that. But There was one point when I did my dissertation, I didn't have any of this, and I was kind of, all this. But there was that one moment when I realized that this was that dissertation was the first time I had a large-scale major project that was my design, my research, my execution, my success. And it was a thoroughly self-indulgent thing for the first time in my life. I hope you have a moment or two of that degree of self-satisfaction as you near the end of this, and I know you will. And Dean Poston and I will be watching you walk across that stage, maybe in May, certainly in the near future, but we'll be watching you. Good luck.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you again to Dean Poston, Dr. Evans, Scott. Without their support, this idea I had literally while walking from the library to Starbucks would never have happened. So thank you again to all of you. And with that, I'll see everyone back down here at noon for lunch, and we'll have people from Psychological Services talking about surviving your dissertation with your brain intact.